We all love the classic Disney film, Mary Poppins. There is a wonderful scene in the movie where a homeless woman goes to the city square and, armed with a bag of breadcrumbs, begins feeding the birds. As the breadcrumbs attract more birds, she begins asking people to donate tuppence so that more birds could be fed. Since people come to church to be fed, that scene provides a pretty good illustration of most church marketing strategies. Unfortunately, humans aren't as easily persuaded as birds, which is why throwing more tuppence into an advertising budget doesn't often accomplish your marketing goals. You might be able to talk your church family into handing out invitations to your church until the Lord returns, but if the people they invite already have an unfavorable opinion about your church, the chances are good that those invitations will be declined and those cool brochures you had printed will end up in the trash. But that's the thing. Everyone in your community already does have an opinion about your church. The question is, how can you help frame those opinions and thereby enhance the likelihood that the people in your community will accept those personal invitations? We will discover the answer to that dilemma and how we can reach more people through marketing.
Gym enthusiasts hate January. Their gym facilities are too crowded for them to get their workout in. The New Year's resolve of those thousands of optimists who are finally going to get into shape, no, this time I'm really going to do it, I mean it. Well, they create waiting lines at the bench press. But everyone knows that only a small fraction of those newbies will actually stick with it for very long. In other words, it's easy to elevate potential, but more difficult to encourage performance. In the immortal words of Mark Twain, quitting smoking is the easiest thing I've ever done. I've done it hundreds of times. Well, pastors are good at raising expectations. We call it casting vision. But if we don't provide the church family what they need to enjoy a successful mission, they'll eventually become discouraged and we lose credibility. Over time, they just tune us out. We become the boy who cried wolf. For example, we probably all would agree that Jesus is coming back, but every time the fireworks are reignited in the Middle East, it's like January at the gym. Unrealized expectations are reignited as well. Same voices say, no, this time he's really coming back. Really, I mean it. End time scenarios are then reworked and the same prophecy books are given new subtitles and sent around the horn again. But most of the audience has lost its enthusiasm. Expectations have been elevated so often without fulfillment that their response is increasingly apathetic. Like anyone else, over time, a church family can become cynical. Same thing is true with the Great Commission. All of us know it's important. I mean, we have to find a way to highlight it in our ministry somehow, right? So every few years we bring it up again. Launching an evangelism program is the easiest thing we've ever done. We've done it hundreds of times. A high-profile pastor was recently teaching the parable of the sower from Mark 13, and he identified the four soils as an indication that most seed would never take root. His conclusion was, since only 25% of the seed finds its mark, make sure you spread an awful lot of seed. By the way, I have utmost respect for that pastor. But when you have a mega budget, it's a little easier to read a shotgun approach to ministry into the text. But we don't have a mega budget. I lead a mega church without a mega budget, so we bring a long barrel approach to the discussion. My takeaway from the parable of the sower happens to be a little bit different. I suppose you could contrast the amount of seed that found its mark to the total amount of seed that was sown, which would be 25%, or you could focus on how much of the seed that landed on the good soil found its mark, which happens to be 100%. Actually, the number would be closer to 95%. My conclusion, though, is this: efficient ministry requires identifying where the good soil happens to be before you plant, and then focus your resources there. Allowing the oikos principle to drive your marketing strategies is very important. Awareness of the oikos principle brings a new energy to your marketing approach. Marketing your church begins long before Christmas or Easter, and understanding the oikos principle is vital to effective marketing. The data tells us that most people do not come to church because of an advertising campaign. They come because of personal invitations from individuals in their oikos. So marketing your church begins with marketing to your church, marketing your mission to the people who already attend. The older I get, the more I recognize that 90% of a pastor's job is to overstate the obvious. So let me say it again. Word of mouth and exemplary lives are the best marketing tools you have at your disposal. So work those tools like a wrench. But marketing to the unchurched is also effective if you let the oikos principle drive the strategy. There even can be value in direct mail and media advertising strategies if they can lend support to those eventual conversations, providing a better chance for a positive response, positive outcome. For example, one of the least expensive and more effective marketing strategies is to simply make your facility available to community groups free of charge. By hosting public school teacher training events, over time, we at HTC have been able to acclimate thousands of public school teachers to our largest campus. We're not even worried about having a type of presence on the stage at those events or even inviting those who are involved to come back on a weekend for a worship service. We're fairly certain that no matter what happens at that event, no unchurched teacher is going to be compelled to come back on the weekend just because we were generous hosts. What we do know is that the many public school employees who are already part of our church family will at some point down the road extend a personal invitation to many of their educator friends to come to something we actually do sponsor on that campus. And when they extend the invitation, the conversation will be enriched by their prior and positive experience there. Another form of oikocentric marketing is to create a media presence on secular radio stations. Now, I have nothing against Christian media. It plays an important role in kingdom work. But if you're trying to fish for the unchurched, they're probably not swimming in the Christian media pool. And radio is a good place to invest your marketing budget because your church family usually doesn't read the newspaper with their unchurched friends. And their unchurched friends probably never noticed the really cool come to our church ads you paid for last Easter. There's a pretty good chance, though, that at some point those friends might hear one of your radio spots. For us, radio ads are relatively inexpensive because they're short. So short, in fact, we don't even take the time to invite the radio audience to church. I just tell a quick, maybe fun, not too profound story, and then cite HTC as a place I work. No matter how long the spot might be, or regardless of what I might say, I never assume that someone in the radio audience is going to accept a formal invitation on air to a weekend service. Not for me. But at some point down the road, someone who already attends HTC will extend a personal invitation to a service or an event, and the response often includes this from their oikos: "Is your pastor the guy I heard on the radio?" And then a completely different kind of conversation ensues between two people who have at least some context and who both to some degree are familiar with the same pastor. In other words, I've helped our church family secure permission from their oikos to have a meaningful conversation about church. Direct mail campaigns may be effective in reaching the same audience that every other church in town's trying to corral, but not in reaching the unchurched, unless the mailing element is something incredibly memorable. They won't come to your church because the mailer is compelling, but the idea it contains may follow them into a personal conversation with someone who already attends. So if you use direct mail or media strategies, be sure to let your church family know in advance so they can watch for opportunities to leverage those strategies. But marketing your church goes beyond an advertising budget. Look no further than your parking capacity. Without clear parking strategies, your church family will clog the local neighborhood with parked cars, and the unchurched have never been impressed with that. One pastor told me the neighborhood now knows that we're a growing church, and I pushed back. No, the neighborhood now knows that you're not very concerned about their neighborhood. If that's what you're expecting them to endure every weekend, you may be actually handicapping some of those personal conversations that will eventually take place between one of your parishioners and one of your neighbors. Bottom line is this: do whatever you can to enrich those personal invitations, the invitations you're encouraging your church family to extend to their oikos. Everyone in your community already has an opinion about your church. That opinion needs to be a positive one if you want to position your church family for success. So help your church family by framing a more positive opinion of your church throughout your community.